Kevin Ezel and I are taking a trip into the future. This is not a trip into the past. This is back to the future. We're going to 2027, and what's the car that was in the Back to the Future? I don't remember the name of it. You remember
Oh
it?
man, I'm the wrong guy to ask on that. Michael
Yeah,
J. Fox, I know that was who it was, but
yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, we're going back to the future. We're going to 2027, and we're going to look at what the leaders are who have healthy churches in 2027, what they did in 2022.
mm,
And Kevin just stated it very, very well in the part one of this, where we're looking at the cultural issues. In part one, he said church leaders need to be making decisions that are going to affect their churches and the kingdom 5 years from now. And that's what we're doing. We're talking about being the best church leader you can be in 2027. And part two, we talked about the culture in part one. Part two is about the basics. And this is going to be a reminder. There's not going to be anything insightful or new or cutting edge on this. It's just a needed reminder. It's kind of
mm,
like waking up in the morning and saying, I really need to have my quiet time and read the word and pray. This is a reminder that sometimes you just need to get back to the basics. I'll give you some poignant illustrations in just a moment. So, Kevin, we're talking about the basics, and we're talking about how, in the midst of all the things that are changing, there are some things that do not change. And I start off with Acts 6:4. And in Acts 6:4, it's a problem that is taking place in the church. And widows are being overlooked in the distribution of food. And so there's argument about who should get the food and who should not. And basically, they're asking the church leaders to take care of everything for them. And the church
mm,
leaders said, wait just a minute. If we start doing everything, we cannot do the main things. Paul would let her write to the church at Ephesus to equip everybody to do the work of ministry. And they said, we have to give our attention, Acts 6:4, to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So, that's the first thing that we talk about is prayer and ministry of the word. I get distracted a lot, Kevin, and I get distracted a lot in my spiritual walk.
mm.
Um, is it just because I can't focus, or is that common, do you think, with a lot of leaders and a lot of people?
No, I think it's very common with a lot of church leaders because everything you do is ministry, and since sometimes you're praying all day long with different people in different settings, and then they just don't take proper care of themselves, and they don't take proper care of themselves, they open themselves up, they're vulnerable to temptations and all sorts of things that they never dreamed that would happen. And it's amazing when I talk to guys who've fallen morally. So often they say it all really started with the downfall of their own personal maintenance of their own walk with the Lord.
So, man, you talk about you want to be the best leader you can be in 2027. Part of that is continuing to have a ministry at all,
As I
because
say, if you want to be a leader in 2027,
yes,
it
not just
really
the
is
best.
the basics. Sometimes you skip over all of that and say, "Man, I want to." It's like a runner's. I want to run the Olympics, but what I eat and how much I exercise is not a problem. We're not gonna address that. I just want to go to the Olympics and get the event done. And some guys, look at ministry more as these events that they're to conquer instead of a journey that they're to enjoy. And man, I see it over and over and over again. It seems like it's being exasperated because of COVID. And man, I just beg you, the best thing you do for 5 years from now is start maintaining yourself now. And I don't know about you, but my doctor, I've gotten that age now where my doctor said, flexing may not be a bad, stretching, going through stretching exercises may not be a bad. He goes, you'll thank me in 5 years. And it made me think, there's things he tells you to do now, so you actually do have more mobility 5 or 10 years. The same thing comes to a church. I mean, you've got to start the right habits now.
Yeah, I'm to the age where my doctor says walking might be good. Just get up and move. Uh, Kevin, as best you can, and I know you can't put yourself in everybody else's mind or shoes, but as best you can, how does it happen? I mean, how do we get so busy that sometimes we even end up far fallen like many of these pastors? What happens It seems
Yeah.
like it starts off good, but then what happens?
I think first of all, we believe that there's not enough time in the day. There's just too many things. But I preached this once. I remember what verse it with, but I said, there's enough time in every day to do everything God wants you to do. I mean, He just would not overload you like that. But as you know, we don't guard our time and we just allow things to occupy. I really think sometimes it's because pastors feel like they're more needed, or they're providing sometimes. If the busier they are, the better they think they're doing. And it's filling your schedule is not the point here. It's really trying to be productive. And I don't know about you, but there've been a lot of times I've finished something and thought, man, this was not a good use of my time, and then others think, now that was worth the time I invested. I just was somehow we had a better system to look ahead. And but I just think some pastors enjoy the time wasters, and they enjoy that, and that's why they don't discard it.
Brad Wagner wrote a book called The Shape of Faith to Come. I think the title was terrible. He thinks the title is terrible too. But it was basically, these things are, if these things happen, then this will be your future spiritual self or your future church. And it was based off of a study that he did that the International Mission Board had actually commissioned him to do many years ago. And here's one thing the study found. If you spend time in the Bible faithfully and regularly, it sounds like it's a duh thing, but here you go. You're going to give more to the church. You're going to share the gospel more. You're going to be a better family person. And the list goes on and on and on and on like that. He showed, in terms of correlative studies, how being in the Bible makes everything healthier spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking about being the best leader we can be in 2027, it's amazing that relatively few pastors really try to get all of their church members into faithful Bible reading devotion time.
Yeah. Oh, you're exactly right. I think that and prayer, what I found is they take Bible or prayer and make those transitional things. So in a service, so you can go from one thing to the next. Well, hey, will somebody lead them prayer there? Or, hey, well, let's throw that in and we'll read scripture there. And it's all to get to somewhere. They're more transitional moments. And, what we're trying to teach our planners now is to take dedicated times of Bible reading and prayer, make that, a very critical part. And it's interesting. And Vance Pittman, who leads our Sin Network now, he said, people first, they thought, my word, what will guests think? What will these non-believers think when they come to church and you spend so much time in prayer? It's like, well, they are coming to church. They're kind of expecting you to talk to God. They're anticipating that being a part of it. It's like, going to a game and teams actually show up. It's like, oh my word. But I just think sometimes we do skip over the very fundamental, basic components like prayer and Bible study that it's our demise.
Well, this is I don't even know if I want to call it a pet peeve because I do it, but it's still a pet peeve even when I do it. And that is in a worship service using prayer as a transition time for everybody to move around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, how are we going to get back on stage here? Well, we'll pray.
How do we get the drums off the stage?
Yeah.
Well, pray. And look, it needs to be at least 30 seconds or so.
Yes.
Like, are you kidding me? Then you're doing like
and really nobody in the room knows that everybody's moving around. They feel all this movement taking place.
Hey, I went to a church once and I was praying and the music minister came behind me and he tapped me on the back. And I was like, I just got there and I was like, I don't know what that was. So, and I forgot to ask him that week. So the next Sunday he did it again. And then I wrote a note to myself, ask him what's he tapping my back for. And he was letting me know everything's clear.
You can stop praying now.
Yeah. And I'm like, look, don't tap out on me. Don't do that. I don't want people thinking I'm a part of that. Don't think that way. Oh, my word.
Yeah, I will sometimes have the worship leader, someone ask me when I'm speaking or preaching, how do you want to transition out?
Slowly and with my kids gathered around.
Yeah. Well, this brings up the third point, and you've already articulated it. Demonstrate prayer when you gather for worship. I
Mm,
mean, do we really? I know we have prayer and worship. It could be the offertory, it could be some type of pastoral prayer, it could be calling on Brother Jack to mumble something. But do many churches really focus on
mm.
prayer in the worship service, the gathered worship?
Yeah, and what I refer to when I mention prayer, I think praying through Scripture is not a bad way of doing it. When certain scriptures, even you can lead your congregation to pray for certain things, whether it be family or challenges they're going through, or I mean, and just walking through particular scriptures in prayer is a great way to do it.
Do you think that this is kind of a hot button opinion, but do you think evangelical churches, as a rule, have gotten away from prayer because we're afraid we're going to be liturgical? I mean, is that a is that a reason, or we just don't think about it?
Honestly, I think some look at the worship service, sadly enough, more as a maybe a production and trying to think of how it will be received. I think we become a little oversensitive to some of that instead of just doing the very basic parts of worshiping, leading people to truly worship instead of leading them to have some type of emotional experience, which true worship will result in that, but we just don't trust it enough, I think. So I think you're right. But
That may be a reason, and certainly not the only reason.
yeah.
So, Kevin Ezel and I are going to a three-part series. We're taking you to the future. We're in 2022 as we record this, or as you're listening or watching this, and we're going to 2027, and we're saying, what did those leaders do the past 5 years? Well, the past 5 years would be starting today,
Mhm.
because now is the time to get ready for the next 5 years. So we're saying, how can you be the best church leader in 2027 today? And the first time we said, you got to know your culture, you got to understand it, and you've got to be able to reach your culture. Now we're talking about the basics. We talked about the basics of prayer, the basics of being in the Word, about the basics of not only in prayer, but in a gathered service too. Here's something else, Kevin, that is just so basic. There's power in groups, whatever we call them: Sunday school classes, community groups, life groups, death groups, whatever we call them. There's power in those groups. And I know that as long as I've known you, you have been a group leader one way or the other, whatever it's called.
Right. The building those sense of, it's a sense of community. People just want to belong. And when you get a church of any size, it's very difficult. And that's why people often say, I love my church of 25, 30, because it's intimate. And that's all a church of 300 has to be, is 10 groups of 30. And and if you really truly want to minister to one another, really minister and really walk through life together, it's in those small groups. I always found that people would open up and respond quicker and easier. So, and I think it's going to be more and more so. I know, we plant churches all over North America, but when you go to major cities, we're planting a lot of these churches. That's all we're able to accommodate. You don't have these large auditoriums and large churches, and you're very dependent upon these small groups. And then they find places to jointly worship, but those groups lead the way.
Give us some practical tips on how to prioritize groups in a church. If you're a pastor and you really want your Sunday school or your community group or your life group, you want your group structure to be preeminent. What can these pastors do? We're telling
Yeah.
them, be the best leader you can be in 2027. They're saying, okay, Thom, okay, Kevin, I want to do that. How do I emphasize groups?
Yeah. Again, everybody has their own strategy about this. I know some pastors will try to uh, break up close friends and spread them around. We always try to do the exact opposite. We used to have one of just UPS pilots because we had so many UPS pilots in the church, and so I like to go the affinity route, find certain affinities people already have in common. If it be a bunch of preschool moms, and it doesn't mean you don't throw, the mixed age is helpful to have some people have different stages of life experiences, but um, where they're going to actually walk through life together. I remember one we were in, we all had teenage daughters going to high school as freshmen.
Wow.
And we all got together in our small group and started talking about, my word, we all have kids going to, and they said, well, what are you going to do about a phone? When are you going to let them have a phone? And I mean, this was years and years ago. And then what are you going to do about dating? You're going to let them date when they're this age or that age. And, it was really fun. That group decided, hey, look, let's just, in a general way, decide on some basic things, and let's just stick together and do away with the peer pressure for our kids, and it worked. I mean, in that particular instance, it worked. But it all happened because we're kind of in the same life stage. And so I always like the affinity groups, and then, but you can mix them and geographically do them. When we were planting campuses, we would find subdivisions, or you don't call them those now, it's developments, and start small groups in each of the developments, and they just naturally happened in an incredible way. We had one planter started having he threw out a thing, wanted to start a small group in his neighborhood, and said, I'm going to have a prayer time on Thursday nights at 6:30. And he said it would astound you the people that show up, because they said they're going to pray for their teachers, the school teachers, and some general things in the community. These people showed up. They were not believers, but they would pray.
Wow.
And he said, we started there. They would pray, but not necessarily to the God we know. They would just start to a higher being, in a sense. But he said he was shocked at who would show up and engage, but it gave him great evangelistic opportunities.
Wow. Well, we formed our community group where I am a church member by age, just ours. It's not necessarily age graded throughout the church, but I am the second oldest person in the church. And so I started a community group. We called it 833 because that's when we started meeting. There's another story to it. I won't bore the listeners or viewers with that, but we originally called it 833. And because we had it at 8 o'clock when nothing was happening at the church in terms of programs or worship, first worship service went until 9. So we had it at 8 o'clock so we could there was no childcare. And that naturally lends itself to those who at least have kids out of the home now, because there's nothing to do with the kids. And it became an older group in the church. I am still the second oldest person in the church, but this is a group of really old people, 40 and up. And really, in the context of our church, that's the old people, 40 and up in our church. That's why we have a vibrant middle school and elementary ministry, but not a big high school ministry, because parents aren't old enough yet.
Hey, I'll never forget when I came to NAM several years ago. First time I'm not being a pastor, I go into my small group, and that particular day at church, at a particular church near where NAM's located, the guy said, "Hey, just want to remind everybody of our Friday night activity," and it was our REO Speedwagon concert.
That showed their age.
They're all, you can tell, hey, we're all the same age, and everybody knew, hey, they knew exactly, and everybody showed up for that one. So
mine would have to be the Beach Boys. I'm even older than that group. There's power in groups, and then we're doing a 3-part series, how you can be the best leader in 2027, 5 years from now. Part 1, we talked about being aware of culture. Today, in this issue, we're talking about the basics of that change, like prayer, evangelism, groups. We're going to talk about evangelism. Evangelism, here's a question that may be impossible to answer because I haven't found the answer to it. But why is evangelism waning in most churches? And I know baptisms are down, but it's evangelism that's waning. What's going on? Because the North American Mission Board puts evangelism at the forefront of everything. It's not a denominational issue. It's a local church issue. What's going on? Why have we abandoned in many of our churches evangelism?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is we've we've lessened the importance of student ministry, quite honestly. A student ministry, you know the percentages that show how early someone comes to know Christ. And what we're trying to do is to really mobilize that next generation, and teaching them. They're very open to sharing their faith, but really having a focus on student evangelism again. Well, I think energizes churches, period. But I think we've lessened, for whatever reason, when we let sports, and I can start preaching, let all these extracurricular activities and sports and going to all the different tutors I didn't have all that, trying to prep for an ACT and all the different academics. There's nothing wrong with all that stuff, but I've just seen all these things come in and take up a family's time, and less emphasis on student ministry. And
Well, that's a good point. There is a proven correlation about age and receptivity to the gospel when you become a Christian. I always like to, when I'm at a speaking engagement, I say, "Hey, raise your hand if you became a Christian before the age of 20." It's usually about 90% of them raising their
oh,
hand.
absolutely, absolutely. And I just see what our fear is that there people are lessening their emphasis on students. So what we're doing is trying to increase it with Shane Pruitt and some other guys who are trying to train this generations of youth leaders to be. And I really believe, man, these youth leaders, these youth are, man, they're ready to go anywhere at any time at any call. I mean, they're ready to go. They're much more adventurous and aggressive than my generation.
Well, Kevin and I will continue talking about this issue about evangelism. We're going to dedicate the entirety of part 3 to this, because if you want to be the best leader that you can be in 2027, evangelism has to be a focus. And we're going to talk about putting that priority back into the church. This is a reminder, 3-part series. How can you be the best leader 5 years from now? We talked about knowing culture. We're talking about keeping the basics. And we're going to go back to the big basic, and that is the basic of evangelism. Hey, before I forget it, I wanted to remind you, just like I did in the previous episode of the North American Mission Board Replant Summit in 2022, look in the show notes, click on, there's a lot of good information there. Make sure you see everything you need to see there, and might be an opportunity that you can take advantage of. So thank you. We'll be back for part 3 of being the best leader you can be in 2027, when we talk about the issue that not enough people talk about. It's the issue of evangelism. We'll see you then.